Welcome to the Fair and Greed Business Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. The telco sector has certainly seen plenty of upheaval over the past couple of months. The outage at Optus really demonstrated just how much modern businesses rely on connectivity for everything from phone systems to point of sale. If anything, it suggests that we're even more reliant on our telcos than you might expect. Even businesses that operate mostly offline have been reminded of the importance of connectivity. So I'm sure recent weeks have seen plenty of businesses assessing what they need and where to get it. Nick Pachos is the Chief Commercial Officer at Superloop, which is a great supporter of this podcast. Nick, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Welcome, Sean.
So let's start with the big picture. What's the state of the sector right now? What has that the Optus outage? What's the impact of that outage had on the sector?
In terms of the state of the sector, we've seen an increased curiosity from new customers looking at our services, trying to understand a couple of things in relation to our services. Firstly, what are the products that we have available, how reliable those services are, and importantly, how much in control we are of the backbone network that helps deliver those services to our customers. And as you mentioned, all businesses are highly reliant on the internet or connectivity. Gone are the days where the internet was a nice to have. It is now the backbone of most businesses that operate today. And that goes anything from point of sale systems like you've mentioned, but cloud applications and most applications that are used. We're seeing our customers wanting to use those applications through traditional means like their computers and their networks at the offices, or indeed via their mobile devices. And the ability to interact with those applications across the myriad of devices and being always available is more critical now than it ever has been, but more top of mind for our customers than it ever has been in the case of recent events.
Okay. So in Superloop's case, you are a little unusual in that you actually have invested in your own fibre optic network. And I suppose this comes to your point about the backbone or the infrastructure that you use. So just explain that. So how much do you rely on the NBN and Telstras of the world, and how much is it your own fibre optic network?
It's quite a complex beast, so a network's made up of many elements. But if we start from the NBN, when a customer buys an NBN service from the likes of Superloop, there is the last mile, which I like to call it, which is delivered by NBN. And that is pretty common across, regardless of the provider that the customer buys that from, that component is the same component that gets bought from any RSP in the market. But what happens from the point where NBN hand that service off, which are in 121 different places across Australia, how we connect that service into our network, how our systems, networks and processes interact with each other to ensure that that service, A, gets nailed up, B, performs as it expected to perform, as in the speed throughput, but C, importantly, there's so many links that go into that, delivering that service, how much resilience we have in the network and the components of the network that enable that service to keep running, even in the case that we have an outage on one particular link. And that is whether that link is a fibre service just going from our main data centre connecting into the NBN. It might be in the capital city. It might be a fibre service that runs from a regional point of interconnect into our network as well. Our ability to have multiple paths, multiple sets of fibres, that connects it nationally. And then importantly, how that connects internationally. And at Superloop, we have our own international network. And in fact, we own our own fibre optic cable that sits deep in the water on the seafloor between Sydney, Perth and Singapore. And all those are parts of our network that allow us to branch out into multiple segments across the globe and deliver, something as simple as, a Google search result into your browser.
Okay, so just for someone like me, and I'm following what you're saying, Nick, but it's what you're saying. There's lots of inbuilt redundancies here. So the idea is that you're not just reliant on one specific set of infrastructure. There are redundancies. Is that right?
Correct. And some of those redundancies may be our own fibre, or they may be services or products that we build over the top of that, because it's more than just the fibre itself. It's our systems and platforms that enable it to interconnect to multiple networks around the globe as well.
Stay with me, Nick. We'll be back in a minute. I'm speaking to Nick Pachos, Chief Commercial Officer at Superloop. Okay, so Superloop as an organisation, I must say I've been looking at your share price and you've been doing pretty well, and your results, your most recent results were good. So, I mean, it's a very tough industry to be in as a telco, right? Obviously, you have a monster player in Telstra, but you have plenty of other players in it as well. What's the competitive advantage of Superloop? If I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, why Superloop? Is it just that redundancy factor? What is it?
Not at all. I think that's one, and certainly an important one, in that we control the network and we have our own network that we are in control of, and our own fibre and associated systems. But there's quite a large number of layers that form part of the service. Being a challenger allows us to differentiate. Okay, so it allows us to do things a little bit differently to some of the bigger providers. It allows us to be a little more nimble. But when you're looking at a business service, for example, you're looking for a provider that not only can offer you a service and, do they have a product portfolio that meets your requirements? And certainly at Superloop, we do a lot of work in ensuring our product portfolio doesn't just exist, but actually serves the needs of our customers and what they're looking for. And those, I guess, characteristics that the customers are looking for are probably changing over time. So we just make sure that our products are not only fit for purpose, but really do provide some, differentiation in the market. And it may be something as simple as giving you some extra speed for a couple of days because you might have a big project that's running, and therefore you can turn that down. So that's one element of it. How do you transition to another provider? So when someone signs up to Superloop, as they would, many other retail service providers, we put a lot of effort in making sure that transition is smooth. We have a dedicated business centre in Adelaide that helps our customers do that transition. And that's one thing that we do see. Our customers are extremely nervous when they're looking for providers to ensure that they can transition from one provider to another because they've got a product that they're after. But importantly, have that support available at the time that they need it to make that transition as smooth as possible and not interrupt, their day-to-day business.
So do you think as we go forward, we're going to end up in the telco space, a couple of really big players and then smaller players who are just nimble, who are able to provide services for certain segments of the economy? Do you think that's how it is? Or are we going to end up with a bunch of providers who offer all services for everyone? Where do you think we're going?
We do already have in the market a number of large retail service providers that have gone and acquired a number of big brands across the market. So we've got those big guys, if you like, already. At the other end of the spectrum, there is a very, very long tail of smaller providers as well who do those niches. And it might be just that they're very cheap, but also maybe have less control over their network or not really deploying or investing in networks to enable them, but certainly offer niche products to certain segments. And then there's sort of this mid-range, and we sit up the top end of town, I guess, not quite as big as the big guys, but you would have seen, as you mentioned, our growth over the last few years, where we're seeing a niche where there are people that need a retail service provider that is big, that de-risks their organisations, but also has the ability to be nimble enough to service their ever-changing requirements. And I think we fit that spot pretty well. Do I think we're going to end up with, more larger ones? I guess, we're sitting at number 5-ish at the moment, so we are larger, but there still is a big air gap between us and the very large ones. But we're seeing an increased momentum in customers coming to the smaller RSPs. And as we look at the market and other sort of parallel markets, we've still got some way to go because the challengers make up a relatively small part of the overall telecommunications market today. But as we look at the energy sector and other sectors, we see that the challengers make a larger proportion, in the order of 30% of the overall market structure of, that particular given market. And in Australia, we're still not there yet. So I expect that the challenger market that we, form part of and hopefully lead, we're already seeing data points that are showing that segment of the market is increasing, and we're certainly well positioned and actually taking our disproportionate share of that market today.
And I presume things like what happened at Optus, and there, but for the grace of God, go a lot of telco providers. So I'm not being critical of Optus in this instance. It does make businesses, though, think about their telecommunication services, their retail service providers, their RSPs, and whether they're happy or not with them, which is probably a good thing for business to be checking in every year or so.
Yeah, and I think it's always a good time to take a check of what you've got and what you've been running for a long time. And importantly, understand how important it is to your business, because it changes. And, we saw in the instance where, people like a hairdresser or a barber or whatever it may be are heavily reliant on a telecommunications service. Yet I think if you spoke to the, proprietors of those businesses, they probably didn't realize at the time how reliant they were. Yeah. They thought about it in the context of an FPOS machine or or tap and go or whatever you want to call it, not really understanding that underneath all that is a telecommunication services that is enabling that.
Nick, thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
Thanks very much.
That was Nick Pachos, Chief Commercial Officer at Superloop, which is a great supporter of this podcast. This is the Fear and Greed Business Interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, Australia's best business podcast. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.